What's going on? Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to talk to you about SoFi. I want to go over some expectations for this upcoming week, what might cause some volatility in the stock price, and go over everything else you need to know. But first, make sure to hit that thumbs up, and with that, let's get right to it. So this upcoming week is going to be fairly interesting because Friday we did have some negative data in combination with a lot of big names unveiling their earnings and giving relatively bad future guidance, and a lot of which are linked to tariffs. So this upcoming week we have a lot of big names unveiling the earnings that, dependent on what they give for future guidance, and if they cite the same thing as, for instance, Amazon, Apple, and even UPS, then that's going to really resurge that fear. So again, we have a lot of big names, Palantir, 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗛, and I feel like a lot of Wall Street is waiting for those companies to fail. No different than SoFi. Obviously, I think Wall Street is still waiting patiently for SoFi to miss on their earnings. And then that way analysts can be like, hey, I told you so. So there is a lot of kind of speculative stocks that have a relatively high multiple that Wall Street is going to be very excited for them to miss. I know that sounds very weird, but Wall Street generally doesn't like to be wrong. This is why analysts consistently give bad ratings on Palantir, even SoFi, 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗛. So there's going to be a lot of volatility this week. And then aside from that, linked to data points, there really isn't all that much. On Tuesday, we have the balance of trade, so that might be a little bit more of a touchy subject given the circumstances that has been coming out, but it is relatively quiet. Second half of the week, so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we do have some Fed speakers, so dependent on what is stated, that could, of course, in among itself, really move the market. But there might be one or two also new analyst ratings that does come out, because I think there's still a lot of analysts that haven't given ratings from SoFi's earnings, some slow stragglers. So these are some of the recent ones. So 2050 initiated coverage, 21, 26, but still looking back, there is a good handful of analysts still not really giving ratings. So let me know your general thoughts on that in the comments below. It's kind of comical to see $6 compass point Giuliano. It's been a very long time since his rating, but interesting to see that he is doubling down on that $6 rating. So I don't know, that's very, very comical. And I don't know how he has a 57% success rating, in all honesty, but nonetheless, anticipate a couple analyst ratings, and depending on how they come out, that could really move SoFi. But there isn't any fireside chats or anything planned for this upcoming week, so it most likely will be just piggybacking off the broader market and everything else I did mention. But aside from all that, going into this upcoming week, 10.4% of the free float is being shorted. Works out to be 121.17 million shares overall being shorted. As I've alluded to in the last couple of videos, I think shorts, by them not really doing all that much, I think they have actually finally had the epiphany that SoFi is here to stay and it's having solid growth. So I think generally they are going to continue to return over the next most likely 5-6 months to where it gets to about that 6% range. No different than what happened with Robinhood. So Robinhood similarly was fairly heavily shorted, and then there was this epiphany that, hey, this stock is actually not going to go down. Same with Palantir, right? So I think people are starting to realize that SoFi is a game changer. You still do see some signs of manipulation though. So cost to borrow minimum is negative. So meaning there is a broker or brokers physically paying people to short SoFi, but clearly I think smarter minds do prevail because shorts have lost a ton of money over the last 3-6 months. But going into this upcoming week, looking at the bulls from the options standpoint, there is a consensus for it to be roughly around that 22 to 22.50. Bears are anticipating for it to be sub kind of 20 to 20.50. So kind of level ground where SoFi did close, with it closing at 21.23. That does mean that the 21.50 and above strike prices expire worthless, which is rather unfortunate. But you do have 20,000 at that 21, 2,000 at that 20.50, 3,000 at that $20 strike price, and then smaller ones right here. So potentially that could cause a nice little bump up in the stock price come Monday. But you do see some transactions that did occur after hours on Friday that most likely was market makers covering. So 4.9 million, 1.6, 7.9, 1 million, 2 million, 2.7, 6.7. So most likely this isn't enough to really cover all of those. So there might be still a little bit of a bump up come Monday. So we'll kind of wait and see how that does play out. But looking forward into this upcoming week, you do have a lot of walls roughly around that 21 and above. And then you have 4,000 at that 19.50, 5,000 at that 20. So come Friday, if let's say SoFi is close to one of these strike prices, that is where you might have shorts kind of wake up and try to suppress it. And typically in the first 2 trading days of the week, this does jump up by roughly around 40%. So keep that in mind, that these low values will be significantly greater come Friday. But aside from that though, I think SoFi is doing pretty good. A lot of volatility in SoFi and also the broader market, and a lot of that is because of kind of lower volumes. I know a lot of people are freaking out over a lot of things, but generally I always like to look at this. So money markets and what big money is kind of doing behind the scenes, whether they are leaving equity and crypto to go to back to money markets or vice versa. But last week, it looks like $1.52 billion did leave both crypto and equity to go back into money markets. So this is why we did have lower volume, and typically lower volume means increase in volatility. So this is why you've seen a lot of craziness in the broader market last couple trading days. But with it right now at 21.23, it is trading between this R1 and the pivot. So 21.02 is going to be a strong support, followed by 20.17, 19.64. Flip side, 21.86, 22.39, and then 23.24 is going to be the next strong resistance slash target point. Targets. So I think it's going to be a very volatile week, and once the market actually does have the epiphany that, hey, maybe we kind of overreacted, this is where things will really start to get bought up. And one thing I've brought up is this. So because of all the craziness that did happen on Friday, now there is a 80.3% likelihood of a cut for the September 17th meeting. And moving over to the October 29th meeting, you even do have a 58.4% likelihood of a following 25 basis point cut. So because of all this fear, you are seeing cuts now on the table. Market, in my opinion, has not priced any of this in. So once the market actually takes a deep breath and says, hey, maybe we overreacted, they will start to price in rate cuts. So thus the dip will be bought. So that's just my opinion, of course, I could be wrong. So just kind of take note of a lot of the support levels if you're wanting to average down, day trade, or whatever else. And then resistance points if you're looking for points of exit or just to sell covered calls. But as I've mentioned in the past, if you do believe that SoFi is going to go higher this upcoming week, or just in general, maybe might not want to do covered calls. But again, you do whatever floats your boat. I'm not here to get you guys to sell nor buy. I'm just reading the data. But aside from analyst ratings, there really hasn't been all that much in articles coming out. On the actual chart, SoFi is doing pretty okay. It is below the ALMA, so it does show that it wants to consolidate a little bit, but Friday, I think, was just more of a gong show overall. Stochastic RSI, you do see it very oversold. So with some good data coming from companies unveiling their earnings, that could really stand to benefit SoFi because, yeah, it'll get bought up fairly fast. One point to really watch for, though, is that roughly around 2020, that's a super trend. If it does break below that, then that does mean that you'll have algorithmic trading really working against SoFi. And we saw that in February all the way down to April. So you had algorithmic trading really adding a certain level of suppression to SoFi. And as I mentioned, with lower volume, technically algos are a very big entity and a big force to kind of watch for. So let me know your general thoughts. Aside from that, we do have the 50-day moving average at 1760. So that's kind of, I don't see that being touched whatsoever today. And then same goes for, this week. And then the 100 and also 200-day moving average is just way out. So yeah, let me know your general thoughts on SoFi. So I do feel that there's going to be a lot of volatility, but by the end of the week, I do feel that we will be relatively green. So closing between this most likely R2 to this R1. But like I said, lower volume, increased volatility, and you never know how a lot of these companies unveiling their earnings is how that's going to play out. So let me know your viewpoint. Where do you see things going? Have you been buying? Have you been selling? What's your kind of general thoughts on SoFi? And then one final thing, pop over to my Patreon if you're looking for some solid buy signals on stocks, options, crypto, many of which have been absolutely on point. Definitely worthwhile to pop over there and take a look. With all that said, appreciate all of you watching.